Hello, and welcome to the channel. Today what I want to do is discuss how I obtained my SOTA, or Statement of Demonstrated Ability. This is a process that the FAA makes pilot candidates or student pilots go through if they have some type of medical deficit that might cause them to fail their flight physical. In my case, it was my vision. My eyes, both of my eyes, are not correctable to an acceptable level per the FAA standards, so I am considered to have monocular vision. This is actually a fairly common question, so I thought I'd do a little brief overview of what I had to do to go through this process to ultimately get my private pilot license. This will also apply to some other areas such as color blindness, people with hearing deficits, or people with maybe deficits in a limb or disability in a limb. This may also apply to that, but I am going to focus very specifically on monocular vision. So this is basically how this all transpired. And what's interesting about this is in the middle of this, the FAA did a rule change which actually was of benefit, and I think it'll be benefit to you as well. And I'll tell you what that is when we get to it. So first, I've always wanted to be a pilot. I never knew that I could. And then I did some research and found out that yes, in fact, it is possible to get a pilot license if your vision is not fully correctable in one of your eyes. Now, my particular case, I have perfect vision with correction in one of my eyes, but my other eye does have a visual deficit that does not meet the FAA standards. So I called my local AME, the Aeronautical Medical Examiner, and just kind of gave him a heads up and just ran it past him and said, hey, what's going to happen? And he did tell me that this would be an automatic deferral, but that there were options. So in my particular case, I am a very healthy individual, as far as I know. I don't take any medications. I exercise. I eat well. My only issue on the exam was my visual deficit. So I went ahead and made the appointment, formal appointment, and went in and did the physical exam. And the AME did tell me right away, he said, I'm going to send this in, which is done electronically, but it will be deferred. And he gave me a heads up that I would need to see an eye doctor, which can be an ophthalmologist, an optometrist, that would need to fill out a certain document. So let me show you what that document is, and we'll kind of discuss it. So this is the Form 8500-7, 8500-7. And what this is a document that you must take. And again, this is specifically for those that have monocular vision. And this is a form that would have to be filled out. And I'll kind of get to the main part of the document. And this is filled out by your eye doctor, again, an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. And the gist of this is, the FAA wants to know that your condition is non-progressive, because when you are given a SOTA, Statement of Demonstrated Ability, it's essentially permanent unless your condition changes. So my vision is not expected to change other than normal age-related changing that happens to all of us. But my visual deficit shouldn't worsen any more than anybody else's. So that's kind of the purpose of this form, and we'll kind of go back to it. And you can just see that they go through and they do an exam, and they get to the end of this in professional evaluation. So here they'll basically put their opinion, and hopefully it will support what you want to happen. In my case, it did. And this will need to be sent in to the FAA. So since the AME had given me a heads up, I went straight to my eye doctor, had the exam, and had this documentation, which I then sent to the FAA. And every document that I sent to the FAA, I sent in such a way that it was basically, either overnighted or 2 to 3 days, in such a way that it could be tracked and I would be able to know that somebody received that document. So that is just a little tidbit that I recommend that you do. Okay, so from there, I basically had to wait. And ironically, or not necessarily ironically, I didn't hear anything back. And weeks and actually a month or two had gone by, and my AME had actually reached out to me to see if I'd heard back, and I said no. So I called the flight medical office, and it turns out it was a good move on my part to call, because it turns out that they should have sent it weeks earlier, but some type of clerical error had been made, and they didn't send out my letter. The individual that I spoke to was actually very nice and polite, and she informed me that the letter was going to say that I had been deferred, but she was very nice, and she said, don't worry, there's going to be some steps that you can take and possibly still get your license, and that would all be outlined in the letter. So not long after that, I did in fact get my letter. And what the FAA will do is they will send a registered copy that you have to sign for, and then they'll just send a regular copy. So you typically get 2 of each. So what I want to do is I actually have they sent me 2 letters at the same time. And basically, and I'll just kind of, read this, not super in depth, but basically it says, we regret that due to your history, we have no alternative other than to deny your application for airman medical certification. And then it says, for reconsideration, please submit the following. And it gives me a list of things that I need to send. But basically, what they're doing is allowing me to request what's known as a medical flight test, and we'll discuss that. The other letter that was in the same envelope basically said the same thing, discloses that you do not meet the medical standards, and it gives the specific title and code, and then it says, this is denied, but it gives you opportunity and tells you what you need to do, and it gives you a time limit, and I believe it was 30 days for me to reply with a letter saying that I do want to pursue a medical flight test. And so what I did was I wrote a letter, and I sent it pretty much right away, and it says, to whom it may concern, I am requesting reconsideration for the denial of my request. My understanding is that I may request permission for a medical flight test. I would prefer to take the medical flight test using the Kansas City FSDO. That's the area where I live, although actually my FSDO is farther away, but for some weird reason I'm closer to this FSDO. Please let me know if this letter suffices for my request. And so I sent that out. And then about a month and a half later, I received the following. It says, you are hereby authorized to take the medical flight test. To complete arrangements, you should make an appointment with, and it gives me the number and address for the closest FSDO, which was the FSDO that I had requested. And it says that I need to bring certain things for this medical flight test. This letter, which is your letter of authorization, that's very important. A student pilot certificate, which I'd already done. I'd already obtained one of those. And then a valid ID. And it says if you do not have this, you can't proceed. And it's almost in a way, it was like a little mini check ride. And actually, in that sense, it was very helpful for me. So I did call, and here's where I had said earlier that there had been a change, and this is where it worked in my favor. For all of us, actually. So my understanding is historically when somebody did a medical flight test, they would contact the FSDO or the FAA, and a representative of the FAA would conduct the flight test. And you would either have to travel to the FSDO or some arrangement would be made and you would meet with that person and do this medical flight test. About a month or so into this, my CFI tells me that he'd come across an article saying that the FAA was going to start allowing DPEs to conduct the flight test. I guess they were getting far behind, and so this would allow more personnel to conduct these tests, which actually is great. That's what DPs do, right? Is conduct check rides. So this was actually good news. And he actually contacted a local DPE, and the change was so new that DPE hadn't heard of it and didn't feel comfortable conducting the check ride. So I did call the local FSDO, and they said, okay, give us 2 weeks. This is kind of new to us too because of this change. We'll find a DPE, and then we'll let you know. And so I did give them the 2 weeks. I called, and they gave me the name of a DPE who I called immediately. A very nice individual. And initially, the plan was for me to go to Kansas City and conduct my medical flight test. And we'll talk about the components of the medical flight test in just a moment. And I was able to, I guess I had nothing to lose by asking. So I asked this individual, would he be interested in coming to the airport that I flew out of, which was about an hour away, 45 minutes to an hour away. And he said he would, provided I paid for that time, which for me was win across the board. It was cheaper for me to pay for his drive time than it was for me to pay for my CFI and a rental plane to fly to, an airport that I wasn't familiar with in a stressful environment. Because here's the thing, you can fail a check ride and take it again, but my understanding is, unless there's just an egregious error on the part of the examiner, if you fail a medical flight test, you're done. Now that may not be entirely accurate, so don't take my word for that. I'm not that versed in it, but that was my understanding. So he agreed to drive out to my local airport to conduct the flight test. And then in the meantime, I had to kind of figure out, well, what the heck do I need to do on this flight test? And I did find that information, and let me show you. So this is, and it's one of those FAA things that has a ton of letters. I will have the link for this document. But this is basically the parameters of what needs to happen on a medical flight test. And this covers other things too, other than monocular vision. Again, this covers hearing deficits, color blindness, and other things. But so basically what you do is you scroll down and you kind of keep going. And let me make sure I can find it. Keep looking. It's part determine the type of medical test. Okay, here is conduct special medical flight test. The first one is for hearing loss. It discusses hearing loss. And here is the one that applies to me. Observe an applicant with visual defect, one eye missing or one eye blind, demonstrate the following in an aircraft. And we basically went through this line for line. The ability to select emergency landing, ability to simulate forced landing in difficult fields, the ability to recognize other aircraft. And it's insinuating here that if you fly at a slow airport, that you may need to make arrangements for other aircraft to be in the area. I fortunately did not have to do that. There were plenty of planes up in the pattern that day. The ability to judge distances and to recognize landmarks, and the ability to land the aircraft. I had to read a chart, and I had to read instrument panels. So basically, I can kind of go through what I did. The first thing we did was I had to spot other planes up in the air. And there were plenty of planes that day, and I've been, training for that. So I showed him where the planes were, and he just literally had a list and marked it off. I had to judge distances. So what he would do is he would pick a landmark, and I had to guesstimate. about how far away I thought that was, and then we would time it. And to see how close I was to that, I had to land the plane. I had to do emergency landings again. It was all, it's all right here. And that is everything that I had to do. And at the end of it, I passed. He filled out, we had to fill out a document. And then I was basically given the following. I did receive my medical. I have a 3rd class. And I received my statement of demonstrated ability, or SOTA. And I have to keep both of these documents with me at all times when I'm flying. And again, the nice thing about a SOTA is, unless there's a change, it's permanent. So the next medical that I go to, I don't have to go through all this again. I can present my SOTA, and I'm good to go. In fact, I'm probably going to be switching over to basic med, and SOTAs are allowed in basic med as well. So that is the process of what I did to get my SOTA, or statement of demonstrated ability. Now, here's the rub, if you will. It is a bit risky. There are some who fail or have a medical deferred, and it may be over a medication, and they may have to jump through a lot of hoops to get that resolved. These several, where there's a hearing defect, color blindness, etc., in my case, monocular vision, you have to demonstrate that you can fly an airplane. So here's where you have to have a bit of faith in yourself, because I had to take enough lessons to learn how to fly an airplane. Basically, the trigger for the medical flight test is, are you ready to solo? Because you can't solo without your medical and a SOTA if you need a SOTA, statement of demonstrated ability. So you're kind of taking a risk, depending on how many hours it takes to get to your ability to land a plane by yourself, because you have to demonstrate to this DPE in your medical flight test that you can land a plane. And if you don't pass this test, then all of that training, I'm not going to say it's for nothing, because you've had the experiences of flying a plane, and hopefully you will learn if you haven't flown. And for those of us who have, it's a wonderful experience. So it's not like it's completely a loss, but having said that, it's a lot of time, certainly a lot of, money, and I was so nervous because I had put so much into this that I would have been devastated, which is another reason that I was really glad that this guy came to my airport, because I was not looking forward to the possibility of flying back from Kansas City, with my CFI, just with my head down. But in any case, I will include links to the 8500-7, and then the form that shows what you need to do. And hopefully this will be helpful. If you have some questions and I can answer them, please put them in the comments below. If this information becomes outdated, I will note that in the notes below. So otherwise, have a great day.